Mountain bike forks have got a bit of an unfair reputation, or at least in my opinion, for being difficult to set up. But it doesn't have to be that way. So today I'm going to set up a set of RockShox forks and take you through the process. A lot of the theories we're going to talk about could obviously be applied to different brands though, so there should be something in here for everyone. In England, we have an old saying that knowledge is knowing that tomato is a fruit, but wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. And it's kind of the same with our suspension. So many people get hung up on the definitions or kind of intimidated by all the jargon, but we don't really need to focus our energy towards there. The important thing when thinking about suspension is getting it set up for the user, which in this case is you. So yes, we will be talking about all the different elements of our forks, but this is about how they ride, and anyone will be able to tell whether they ride better or worse, and that's all we're going to focus on today. So for this setup, you're going to need some basic tools. So I've got some Allen keys here, we have a cassette tool, as well as some bottomless tokens and a shock pump. I can't really get my head around it. The fact that somebody would be willing to spend, say, £800 on an upgraded fork without setting up their current set correctly, because it only takes about half an hour. And I would also say that my logic would suggest they're probably not going to spend that half an hour on the new set either. So let's just take it back to basics, look at what we're running and get it set up to maximize the performance of our suspension. When I used to work as a mechanic on the races, so World Cups and EWS, we'd actually set up the riders' bikes using a similar sort of theory, boiling it down to two main components, better or worse. And it's as simple as that really. Now we'd probably take a little bit longer and maybe their demands would be a little bit more finite, but we can definitely take that theory to all mountain bikers and let them benefit from it. So I'm not going to go into definitions too much today or talk about the technical explanations of how our suspension units work. But if you are interested in that, I went into it like a fox into a chicken coop not so long ago. So I'm going to leave a link to that video in the description below. Now, before we do anything to the suspension unit, we need to get some basics straight. So the first things first, and it's absolutely vital, you need to be sure to back off any adjustments to leave them in their fully open setting. An easy way to remember this is it's just like a tap. So all the way to the left is going to be in its most open setting. So do that to the compression and rebound adjustment. The second thing is, if you dress up like a medieval knight to go mountain biking, then don't set up your forks whilst wearing a pair of flip-flops in your pants, because you need to be roughly the same weight. Now, for instance, sometimes I ride in knee pads, sometimes I don't. You don't need to be that particular. But if you're going to wear 5 kilos of protective kit, then it's worth putting on. Now, assuming we're setting up this fork from brand spanking new, and let's go even further and say that it hasn't got any air in the chamber whatsoever. Now, you can spend quite a bit of time pumping up and getting on, then pumping up and getting on, or you can make your life far easier and using the chart on the side of the leg to basically put you in the right ballpark in terms of sag. Now, this isn't perfect, but it provides a really good starting point to make the finer adjustments. You can even go one step further. On the back of your crown there, you will find a serial number for your fork. You can plumb that in to RockShox's website and it will give you some really good base settings, including rebound. Now, if you don't have that, that's not important. It's just a nice way to save time. I'm also going to leave a link in the description below to that website if you want to use it. So now that we've got that base pressure, it's almost time to inflate our forks. But before I do that, I just thought I'd talk you through how the air springs in these forks work, because it should help you set up your forks more consistently once you have a bit more understanding. Now, this seal here, and this is a replica of what's inside this fork, is absolutely airtight to that tube. So no air can get past, and that's really important obviously when we're dealing with really large amounts of compression. The last thing you want to do is to be burping air. So that is a very, very tight seal. But here, there's another tight seal, because this sits like this, and you've got your positive air chamber, which is a lot larger, and at the bottom you have your negative air chamber. Now, these want to sit at the same pressure, but obviously you've only got one place to get the air inside the fork. So what happens is, you inflate the fork, say you inflate it to 100 psi, and as you do so, that air chamber is getting more and more pressurized, and obviously it can't get past here, and so it's going to impact the size of the negative air chamber, and you might see your forks even getting a little bit longer. So what you need to do is equalize the two chambers. There is a very simple but ingenious solution to how we can equalize these two chambers. there is a small dimple on the inside of this tube at around sags, around 20–30% of the stroke. And what that does is as that seal reaches it, it just goes past the dimple and lets air migrate from the positive to the negative chamber. It's at that point you might see your forks suck down as that negative air chamber, which sits just there, comes up to pressure. Now it's really, really important because if you set that to 100 psi, once it inflates the negative, the positive will probably drop to say 80 psi. And then of course you need to top it back up to 100, and then you're going to equalize again, and it will probably drop to 95, and then you repeat. So it's really important that both these air pressures are the same, and it's going to help you set up your forks more consistently if you do that process properly. So just set them up, cycle the fork through its travel, and I promise you, you'll hear a tss, and that's the air migrating. Now, in solidarity with the viewer, I'm actually going to take my fork right back to basics as well. So here I have that top cap, which can be easily removed with that cassette tool. And it's a great place to access because you can change the amount of bottomless tokens that you run. So a really good place to start for a 29er is with 2, or at least I think it is, and with a 27.5 or 650, just with the 1. This is because it gives you somewhere to go should you want your fork to be a bit more linear as opposed to progressive. What that means is the more of these bottomless tokens you install, the more bottom out resistance you're going to have. Now that's really good because it means you can stop your fork bottoming out and blasting through the travel without having to run, exceptionally high pressure or a high spring rate. So you can still have a fork that tracks the ground nicely and offers good small bump compliance. I would say, however, as a word of caution here, I think sometimes people end up chasing their tail with these. They add lots of bottomless tokens, so the fork's very hard to bottom out, and they want to run low pressure to reap the benefits of that small bump compliance. But the initial part of the stroke is so unstable, they have to end up running lots of compression, and that small bump compliance goes out the window. So we want to set up our sag properly, irrespective of the amount of these we have in. And from my experience and my style of riding, I like to kind of ride trails like this. For a bike like this, it's about 20% of the stroke. And you've got those markings on the side of the fork, don't forget. Once you have your sag set at 20%, that's when we can come back to these tokens. If you're out riding and you never reach full travel, then you can perhaps remove one. Similarly, if you blast through full travel all too often, you can add one. What these tokens enable you to do is essentially have your cake and eat it too. They mean you can have some small bump compliance as well as big hit resistance. And that's really, really important to ensure our bikes offer the stability we need when we're charging hard. So with your base pressure installed, we can actually go and remove the... Now you might have noticed that I've actually changed my spot, and that's because we need nice level ground to do this. This means that it's more repeatable, more consistent, and it's going to give you, like I said, better results. Now the way that we set our sag is important, but it's not a perfect science. The best thing is to find something that is repeatable and consistent for you. So that might just be sitting down like this. If that's what you're used to dealing with, then that's no bad thing. Personally, I like to get my shoulder leant against a tree and just push that O-ring down. Now what we would want to be is holding the brakes because that's going to bind some tension in the bike. And although we want some initial bounces just to kind of get the forks settled and into their stroke, what we don't want is to do any bounces after we've set the sag. So I'm just going to bring it back a bit, reset my pedals, do some bounces, release the brakes, push it down. And in that kind of rough and ready position, I like to kind of get just my head over the stem there. And then we're going to gracefully dismount. Like I said, we're not going to bounce and lose our point. We're just going to hold it there. And we want it to be about the 20% mark. So how's that looking? Well, for me, it's a little bit soft. So I'm going to add a little bit of PSI, trial and error, and eventually you'll get it right. I like to run 20%, and that's because how the bike will ride dynamically. It's going to keep the front end a bit higher. You can run your bike at 30% sag on the forks. Anywhere really between 15 and 30% is kind of the operating range. Some people that will really suit. For me, it's just not going to be, it's not going to give me much stability. And I don't like the feeling like you're kind of dropping at the front. So I like to keep them quite high up and high pressure. So I'm just going to reconnect my shock pump. Now, as we do this, the pressure might be slightly lower than what we remember. Now, that's no bad thing. Nothing's gone wrong. All that's happened is that as you have disconnected the shock pump, it's let the air out of here. And then you've had your pressure, so you've gone back and you've said it was 100 psi, you've reattached it, and it's 98 psi. Where's that gone then? And it's because as you reconnect the shock pump, the fork chamber is having to inflate the hose again. And so that's kind of a net loss. But I'm just going to go from my base setting, which was around 100. I'm going to take it, I think, to about 110. And this is why it's really important we use the same shock pump every time, because truthfully, like I said, accuracy is kind of arbitrary, consistency is king. There we go. Then I'm just going to disconnect it there and repeat the sag. And then gracefully dismount. What do you know? So I'd say that's probably about 22% sag, 23% sag. I'm going to add 5 more psi and then I reckon it'll be mint. So that is my air leg all set up with my sag at 20%, which is just how I like it. Now from here on in, when you're adjusting the pressure in your fork, I would say once you know what your sag is and you're sitting at that mark, then you can add a psi here, take it away, and you can find yourself being a lot more accurate and a lot more precise using the psi measurement as opposed to trying to measure 1/2 mil of sag, which is particularly difficult, especially when you're by yourself. So if you wanted to make the fork just a little bit softer, I would advise going down 2 psi as opposed to coming back and trying to run 1 mil more of sag. So now it is time to set up the damper, and actually removed one from a similar RockShox fork just to kind of show you and isolate what's going on. Now with this damper here, I have turned the Rebound fully closed, so all the way to the right, and against my admittedly puny arms, it puts a very, very good fight up. Rebound circuits can be unbelievably strong and provide a huge amount of resistance to the bike going through its stroke. So it's not something to be ignored or just forgotten about. Setting Rebound is absolutely vital because it can stop the bike bucking you, it can stop it kicking you, and it can mean the bike tracks the ground, the wheel following the contours into any holes or dips it needs to, whilst providing lots of traction. And that's particularly important under braking. Similarly, if we crack on all the compression adjustment, you'll see why it is so important. It's so hard to compress. Yet again, this is just my hands going at it, not my body weight. So it's maybe not a watertight experiment. But one thing it does illustrate is that's full compression. I can still just about get it through the stroke. But it does show how much resistance a Rebound circuit can provide. And that's because we put a huge spring rate in these forks. And whilst compression only really has to complement that spring rate and provide additional support, a Rebound circuit has to do a huge amount of work. If you imagine me taking that top cap off that fork now, it gets about 20,000 feet. That's what the Rebound circuit's got to contend with, okay? So it's really, really important. Because what these dampers enable us to do is have the wheel tracking the ground all the time, as best as possible. So let's get into this fork particularly and set it up. Now, going back to earlier on, I spoke about that RockShox website and it giving you a Rebound tune as standard. And that's because, of course, Rebound is relative to spring rate. The more pressure you run in your fork, the more clicks of Rebound you're probably going to have to run as well. Now, some fork manufacturers even provide recommended compression settings from stock, and that's done off a couple of different aspects. Things like spring rate, so your body weight really, how much resistant the fork has to provide. With RockShox forks, I find in my experience it's best to leave the compression settings open and then add as needed. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the Rebound first. So if you're using the recommended settings from the RockShox website, it is worth bearing in mind that in mountain biking, we tend to count our clicks from fully closed. So remember, like I said, it's like a tap. So dial it all the way in, so all the way to the right, and then back it off the number of clicks they recommend. I thought, however, I would do mine without that recommended setting, just to talk you through my process. Now this fork is actually fully open at the moment, which is no good at all. It's almost verging on something we call top out. Top out is a mechanical noise or feeling the rider gets as the fork reaches, or the suspension unit reaches back to full extension. It's not nice on any level and can contribute to a lot of unwanted noise and feel out on the trail. Now what I would recommend doing is putting your clicks right in the middle. So go through the full range, count the clicks, and then just go to the halfway number. That's a really good place to start. For me, I normally work in 2 clicks, just to find the right ballpark, and then I'll go back. So actually, I think I might have been a bit too hasty. I might actually open it up, back 1 click. So that's my base setting. Now, if you wanted to, this is a great place to write these settings down. I, like the nerd I am, have a little spreadsheet document as a leftover from my racing days, and it's a really good place to keep tabs. So that's largely the fork in a really good place now. So what we're gonna do is go up and do a run and then come back to it. Now this run basically just needs to be a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It doesn't need to be anything crazy, and you don't need to be absolutely pinning it, because you're not pinning it all the time. You just want something that's about a minute long, easy to get to the top, and you can have fun on. So that was the first run. And like I said, we want to break it down to better or worse, If you're teaching a child to speak, I suppose, that's the first step towards articulation, just better, worse, good, bad, and you can worry about writing sonnets about suspension at a later date. Right now, we're just talking about better or worse. And so for me, riding that, I felt my gut instinct, and that's what we're going off here, gut instincts, that was a bit too fast on the front. I felt it meant that a couple of different things, but it meant I could never really get into the travel, and it felt a little bit unstable. So I'm actually gonna close it off 2 clicks. So to the right, if it helps you, got the turtle there, 2 clicks slower. And then we go and we get another run in. Simple. Don't worry about riding the exact same line every time, and don't be afraid of mixing it up. This will only increase your understanding of how the fork feels. That was actually so good, way better. But what we need to do is we need to, let me get ref back. We need to get to a place where we find out what the limit is and then we back it off half a turn. That's not a dead end just because it got better. What we're actually gonna do is we're gonna close it off another 2 clicks. And if that's worse, then we can come back. We've even got a Goldilocks middle ground. But what we don't wanna do is just be like, yeah, that was good. We need to get to a setting and take it to a point where it becomes worse and then bring it back. That's the only way you can really establish that you've got the right compromise in your settings. So, another run. I know when I'm out riding, I make mistakes all the time. So your bike needs to be set up to cope with all of your riding, warts and all, not just your perfectly dialed lines. So if you do make any mistakes on these runs, don't worry about it, because that's valuable information too. So, that was worse. Which is great because I found the limit. What it felt like, if I was to articulate what I felt like was going on, was that, these kind of little O-rings here, these travel indicators are really, really good for helping us, see what's going on with our fork in a way that we couldn't. We couldn't see max travel used in that instant. We need something to refer back to. Because often if your rebound is too slow, it can often mimic other issues. For instance, it might mean, because your rebound's very slow, you're never returning to full travel, so your travel indicator's sitting right there, and you'll be thinking, I need to add more air pressure, or a few clicks of compression. But that's not necessarily true, that's not what's happening. The only way to find out for sure is to experiment like this and just do repeated runs. and you're training your sights. And once you do this on a couple of different bikes in a couple of different places, you'll find yourself waxing lyrical in a way you never could before, because you'll actually have, empirical evidence of the things you've experienced, and you'll be able to quantify what these things mean, which is vitally important. So that was worse. So I'm actually going to go back, open up one click to go to that Goldilocks setting as discussed, and we can see how that is. So off we go. That felt mint actually, to be fair, which is great. We're there, hooray, rebound, done. Next, we're on to compression. So now that we've got the rebound in a place where we really, really want it, and in fact, I want to actually show you a very quick magic tricks in regards to our rebound. And I'm going to clap my hands and I'm suddenly going to have a damper. Hey presto, here it is. So what I was talking about earlier on, it's a really good way to illustrate it. If we get lots of hit, maybe for whatever reason, riding rough trails, getting hit, and admittedly this is with my quite puny arms against 100 psi in a relatively small chamber, but what it means is that you can never return to full travel. So your bike could be working almost towards the end stroke almost all the time, and it would have almost nothing to do with your spring rate or your compression settings. The problem is that rebound circuits, because they have to resist such a high spring rate like we discussed earlier on, can sometimes be so powerful they provide a red herring and actually point the finger where the blame does not lie. Now, you might have noticed with other manufacturers, they do provide a set amount of clicks as a base setting for your compression adjustment. Now, like I said, in my experience, the RockShox stuff, I tend to run it more on the open side of things and then dial in as needed. It's also worth noting that this damper I have in the fork doesn't have a high-speed compression adjustment. So what that means is we're just going to set the low speed, and then that's largely you're done. If you had a high-speed compression adjustment such as this damper though, you could, after setting the low speed, then go about setting the high speed. And yet again, you don't really need to understand about velocity and spring rate and force. All you need to be able to do is quantify better or worse. Cut and shut. But anyway, that's me yammering on enough. I said I can't, you shouldn't articulate about suspension. Now I'm not shutting the hell up. But we're going to dial in the compression adjustment, 2 clicks, and go and give it another run. Now that felt pretty good. I think it was better in its original setting though, but because I went 2 clicks dialed in, I can back it off 1 and we'll go up and we'll give it another run. Simple as that. That's all you need to do. That was pretty good actually. I reckon that's the one. That felt really, really good. Now, that is my suspension setup, actually, dare I say it myself, to really suit my own needs. As you can see, I'm using almost kind of full travel at some parts. So you could experiment with adding a bottom out token, or a bottomless token, sorry. What that would do is make it harder to reach those parts. And it kind of really is that simple, to be honest with you. If you ever find yourself getting to a point where you need to climb down from perhaps, go back to sag. Sag is king in that regard. And you'll find from You know, when you get a bit more experience, like maybe 20% sag is a bit too firm for you. Maybe 25% more suits your riding style. So it's, you know, it's trial and error to a degree, but if you find what that sag range is for you, then stick to it. And also another really good tip, once you have your pressure, you can actually use a silver marker, and on the inside of this cap here, just make a note of it. And then yet again, if you ever want to go experimenting, you have some settings to come back to. I would also very much suggest writing them down somewhere, because you will forget. I don't care who you are, you'll be adamant you won't, but you will, and then you'll be annoyed at yourself. But that is it. That is how to set up your mountain bike. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope I've been able to shed some light and show you that it is actually quite an easy thing to do and doesn't have to be intimidating. Now, thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Cheers, guys.